Hey, we're back for another season of the High School Football Podcast. I'm Chad Conine, along with Trib Sports Editor Brice Cherry. How's it going, Brice?
Going well. Excited to have the games back. Although some are getting,
we got kind of
getting the
bummer of a news item earlier today, just about an hour before we started this podcast. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. Our big game of the week, really, La Vega and Connally.
Yeah, in fact, I had that second on the script, but let's go ahead and just address it now. In fact, I got a lot of my work done, and I went over to Top Golf, as I'm prone to do, in the afternoon for a little while. And on the way, I called Terry Garrick just to check in at Connally, make sure I was on the list there, talk to him a little bit about the matchup with La Vega, and I got kind of a bad hit because the phone rang twice and then went to voicemail, like it had been sent over there, right? And this is like at 2:00 on a day when they could have practice anytime during the day, so you'd assume they would have gone this morning. And I thought, hope that's not. I just had a bad feeling about it. Sure enough, I go play Top Golf for an hour, and then you send me a text that the La Vega Connally game is off, and so that's how that one fell. They had testing in the community, which if I'm a football coach and they start testing everybody in the community, I'm just like, oh great, here we go. And sure enough, that's what happened. They had like a 25% positivity rate. Now, I don't really understand why they couldn't have played with no fans, but they just made the call, and I feel like it was probably let's just do what's best and not ruffle any feathers type of decision. What's your take?
Well, Connally has been one of the hardest hit schools, obviously, to start the year by COVID, with classes not happening right now at both Connally and Axtell right now are two schools that, are not.
No, Axtell has class today and tomorrow.
Okay. Well, they moved their game up with Bremond to tomorrow, I guess,
right,
to get that in. But
yeah, they have no classes or extracurricular activities on Friday and Saturday is what it boils down to.
Okay.
Or Monday. They can't practice on Monday.
Back to Connally. I mean, like I said, they've been hit really hard by this. They've had two different teachers pass away due to COVID. So I can understand erring on the side of caution. We don't know, you and I, what the number of cases might be within the Connally football program.
Wait, we do know that, actually.
Okay.
None on varsity.
None on varsity. Well, like you said, then why couldn't you play with no fans? I mean, that's a great question. But, again, erring on the side of caution is not always the worst thing. So,
I mean, like Terry Garrick said, might as well, if it's going to happen, it might as well happen now before district games come along.
Right. It stinks from the perspective of this was a game that obviously we would have been sitting here talking about as a very attractive matchup. That was a game that you were planning on going to cover. So, it would have been fun to see how that one played out. And obviously, as you're trying to progress as a football team, those are the kind of games you want to play because it exposes you. It shows you where you need to get better, whether you're La Vega or Connally.
Right. And, this is 2 years in a row when I was supposed to cover Connally versus La Vega. And last year I did cover it, but I got over there and that squall came through of a storm and had lightning and thunder and all sorts of rain. I retreated to my house, and that happened to be like the TV game of the week. So I covered it off TV, turn around a year later and the game gets canceled. So maybe they'll re-up the series and I can try again in 2022.
Well, certainly it's a series that we want to see continued because whatever the sport, it's always a great rivalry. It's one of the best basketball rivalries around here as well. But it's a game, absolutely, we want to see continued.
Right. A little bit on the lighter side, the big story in high school football nationally this week has been Bishop Sycamore. Everybody and his dog has been making jokes about these guys on Twitter. Brice, I was telling you a minute ago, The story is that this Bishop Sycamore just kind of constructed a football team in order to get like a TV payday. And then they got obliterated by IMG, and people start looking around and going, wait a minute, that's not really even a school. So
yeah, actually the first person who relayed the news to me this week was my son Cooper, who obviously was following it on some social media or whatever. But yes, it has spawned all manner of jokes. There's a good sports writer in East Texas, Jack Stallard, who did one of these in personal news. I have decided that I am taking the sports information director position at Bishop Sycamore, that's a great joke.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of them this week. When La Vega announced that they were playing Bishop Dunn, I was glad it wasn't Bishop Sycamore.
Oh yeah, we didn't mention that a second ago. La Vega has rescheduled to Bishop Dunn. But okay, so I've kind of got a joke, kind of a corny joke about it. But I have like a real observation about how this whole thing went down. And I think probably Bishop Sycamore kept their whole thing under wraps until they went on TV, which is maybe the like most clever thing they did, because they would have got called out pretty quick. I mean, if there was all of a sudden, a Bishop Red Oak in Waco, then we would have been like, excuse me, what? Right.
Right. Yeah.
But when you think of Bishop Sycamore, that name, what kind of school is that to you? Like if it were a real school?
It sounds like a private school.
Right, like a Catholic school, right?
Yeah, sure.
Like Bishop Riker here in Waco.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, if you float your name out there as Bishop Sycamore, somebody in that parish is going to be like, there's no Bishop Sycamore school. There's never been a Bishop Sycamore, for one thing. And there's not a Bishop Sycamore within our diocese. That school does not exist.
Maybe they did their homework. Maybe there is a Bishop Sycamore.
I actually Googled it. Like that's the only thing you find. And then like there's some other things, maybe there's some sort of play called The Sycamore, probably involving Zacchaeus, that's been performed at Catholic churches, but anyway, so my corny joke is that Duncanville, which is supposed to play Bishop Sycamore on December 10th, they dropped them like a bad habit.
Oh gosh, habit. Yes, yeah.
It's like a nun like a nun wears.
Yeah, I got it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really bad. They're officially off the rails for the first time in 2021, but.
That's what the high school football Friday night light Super Syndex podcast is for, though. Really, is to go off the rails.
Yes. A couple thoughts that I have. One, I sort of finger wag a little bit to ESPN for not doing its due diligence and maybe researching this program a little bit more before it decided to put them on the air. And then two, what does it really matter in terms of Bishop Sycamore versus IMG? Because all IMG really is a football factory. I mean, that's all it exists for. I mean, they can say there's an academic component to it all they want, but I mean, essentially you had two football programs going at it rather than two academic institutions.
Yeah, and I think to me it's a good sign for the world that we live in today that something that's constructed and goes around the usual way of doing things fell flat, because with name, image, likeness, and conference realignment and all this stuff upon us that is just going away from traditional, basically, mode of operation, just doing things a different way because we think it's going to be better, or we don't have to have all the old rules and old ways. Well, in a lot of cases, those traditions and things like, having an actual school where people actually go to classes with non-football players and all of those things sometimes that makes sense, and sometimes that makes, a Lorena China Spring football game a whole lot more appealing than some manufactured football factory for ESPN event.
Yeah,
right?
and I think one of the things that you and I both appreciate about high school football is just the purity of it. It's in a world where pro football, college football has been invaded by a lot of money interests, and things get sullied in the name of the almighty dollar, including now a 17-game NFL season, including Texas and Oklahoma jumping ship to the SEC. It's all money driven. It seems like more so on the high school level, it's not as much. That's not to say money never plays a factor in high school football as well, but that's one of the things we certainly appreciate about it. Also, I'll say, this will probably end up on some lists of, one of the stranger sports stories of the year, and yet it didn't really feel that out of left field for me. I mean, it's funny, it's weird, but it didn't shock me in the sense like as far as like the strangest sports story of my lifetime has to go down as Manti Te'o and his
and you saw some cross-referencing of those two stories.
Yeah, as his catfish girlfriend. To me, that really introduced me to the idea of catfishing.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that was just such a strange deal, but this didn't reach that level for me.
No, but what it does speak to is when you get outside, and I don't want to, TAPS, I'll throw TAPS in there because they're a pretty solid organization, but in a lot of ways, when you get outside the UIL, you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, it's a little more of the Wild West when it comes to some of these non-public schools. I mean, it's like you said, I think it's better governed in Texas, but like I said, IMG very much exists as this athletic, factory, and so that they played another athletic factory, who cares?
Right. Well, we could this could be one of those hour-and-a-half podcasts, I've been listening to the Office ladies recently, and their time structure is a little bit different than ours. I mean, they're breaking down whole episodes of The Office. So
and just,
let's get back on
just a reminder, I have the free version of Zoom that cuts off after 40 minutes.
Oh, well, then there's our time parameter. What are we at now? We're only about 27, so we can afford to chase a few more rabbits. So I bumped from La Vega Connally to Lorena China Spring. Sorry, Brian Coates. But I really wanted to see that one anyway. I mean, I wouldn't have picked it over Connally-La Vega, but I sure would have hated to not been able to cover that game. And it's a really interesting, it's the clear game of the week. To me, it's really interesting for a couple of reasons to me. What appeals to you about the Lorena China Spring matchup?
Maybe just a litmus test for Lorena. Obviously, hard fought, tough game against Franklin last week. And now you line it up against one of the best teams in Class 4A in the state, in China Spring. Obviously, we saw what the Cougars did last year in the playoffs, in just the run that they went on and beating top 10 team after top 10 team for 3 weeks to open the playoffs. I mean, they had one of the toughest and most impressive runs, I think, of anyone in the state. So I like China Spring to win this game, playing at home. They were impressive last week against Trinity Christian. But like I said, the thing that, it does speak to just Lorena's willingness to play anyone, that they're even lining up against China Spring. And they've played each other a lot over the years. But so I mean, I just think it's a place where Ray Biles can tell his team, look, this is where we've got to get better. And that's not to say Lorena couldn't, jump up there and spring the upset, but I definitely like China Spring in this matchup.
Yeah, that kind of leads right into what I was going to say. Is it kind of feels like to me an old school early 90s Texas A&M Texas Tech matchup, and that A&M was the superpower at the time, but that didn't mean Texas Tech couldn't beat them. And every now and then they would sneak up there and give them a heck of a game. And I think actually when I was in school, and that was more late 90s, Tech beat them 3 out of 4 years. But you go out and you play a good game and you get momentum going on your side, and you can beat a team like that that's maybe a little bit better than you. But I think Lorena feels like it should have beat Franklin last week. Now, what's the gap between Franklin and China Spring?
Right. I do think that China, the fact that they have scheduled Lorena says to me that Brian Bell looks at this Lorena team and goes, this is a team that can help us get better.
Yeah.
I mean, Lorena returned the offensive newcomer of the year, the defensive newcomer of the year on our Super Centex team. They got a lot of talent on this Lorena team. And so it's a good, matchup for China Spring as well to say, hey, it's not just a good old fashioned, former district rival. It's also a game that can help us get better.
Yeah, and it might be the best challenge on China Spring's non-district schedule. I think they've also got Brownwood and Mejia on there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think out of those games, including the Trinity Christian game in that mix, I'd put Lorena right up there at the top of that list.
Speaking of challenges,
I know where you're going.
Right, and I haven't checked up on the mighty Permian Panthers yet for this season, but probably the most famous high school football program in our state comes to town as Odessa Permian plays at Midway on Friday night. On our picks box, I picked Permian to win, spoiler alert, and I just put OPP. Because when I was like early high school.
Will that one make it past the censors?
Or 8th grade? I don't know, but probably because, you're on desk. Wait, no, John's on desk tomorrow night, so he'd have to catch it.
Here's
the thing. I think Odessa Permian won the state title in like 1991 when I was in 8th grade. And you know what was the big song at the junior high dance at that time?
What's OPP?
OPP by Naughty by Nature. And so, the Odessa Permian Panthers and Friday Night Lights had been out, for a little while at that point, the book. And it's amazing to think that a nonfiction book generated that much like vibe for the Permian program. But speaking of, tell me your recollections of reading Friday Night Lights.
Oh man, just one of the best sports books ever, in my opinion. I thought it perfectly captured what we understand and know about Texas high school football in rich and vivid detail. Thought Buzz Bissinger did a great job. It was one of those cases, the first book that I can remember reading like that was a case of a reporter embedding himself within a team or a community was A Season on the Brink, where John Feinstein went behind the scenes with the Indiana Hoosiers and amazingly Bob Knight led him. And really, I just remember reading A Season on the Brink and going, oh my gosh, this is just so cool to see all this behind the scenes stuff. You got the same idea in Friday Night Lights. And I just remember a lot of scenes in it where one of the classic ones was the tie atop the district, and these three coaches meeting at this remote West Texas undisclosed location where they did this coin flip to see which of the two of the three were going to get to advance to go to the playoffs. Just crazy stuff like that, and all of it true, and stuff that we've encountered over the years in terms of high school football. It's a little different now with more teams making the playoffs and some of the tiebreaker rules that they've put into place so that it does not come down to the flip of a coin. But it was just very, very well done. I thought the subsequent movie did a great job, honestly, of capturing a lot of the elements of the book. I know you have some critiques of the movie, but
the movie's good. I can live with the movie.
One of the great things about the movie, I thought, is that it did not Hollywoodize it too much and change the ending to more of like a Hoosiers type ending. They lost.
Right.
Permian lost that year that Bissinger wrote the book. And you mentioned, I think you're right in terms of Permian probably being the most famous Texas high school football program in the country. And the irony of that is we've got a lot more successful programs than Permian. Now, back in the 70s and 80s, I think was more of their heyday. That was sort of the golden age of Permian football. But but still, the mojo, they carry a lot of mojo, in the state, and it'll be cool for Midway to play Permian this week. You mentioned, you weren't sure where they were as a program. I know they went 8-3 last year, so they're still putting out a solid product. Maybe not at the level of back in the day when Boobie Miles was there, and
Or how about Lloyd Hill or
the quarterback ended up going Mike
or Roy Williams.
Yeah, Roy Williams. Yeah, what's funny is Roy Williams was on that team that Bissinger wrote about, and he's really a bit player in the book. He chose some other.
No. Lloyd Hill was on the team.
Lloyd Hill.
Yeah.
I knew a great receiver was on that team, and really wasn't a major character in the book. There were some other guys that he focused on, including the quarterback, including the star D lineman who was, kind of they each had their own little story. Willoughby, I think, was maybe the safety that Tim McGraw plays his dad in the movie.
Oh yeah.
And there was that whole dynamic. That the quarterback, I want to say Mike Winchell, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up signing or coming to Baylor, didn't really play. But one of the big things there was just that whole idea of, was he really into it? That was kind of the storyline with him, was like, he was the star quarterback, but it was like, he had all these things kind of pulling at him, and was he really going to embrace it? You got a little of that in Dazed and Confused, honestly, with Randall Pink.
Right. It was kind of like the same as The Ambivalence of Ivory was one of the chapters. The quarterback was in that same situation. Yeah. And I think a lot of that stuff was painted a certain way by Mr. Bissinger. So, by the way,
a little creative license. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Permian beat somebody called El Paso Pebble Hills 26-15 last week. So this might not be insurmountable for the Midway Panthers.
Yeah, Midway, obviously you saw them last week, got a long way to go defensively, giving up 69 points and 0.
One thing that I didn't mention in my article that hasn't really been mentioned is that Knox Walker, one of their starting safeties, is out with a shoulder injury, I believe, until maybe district play. I'm not sure it's a shoulder. He's out with an injury until district play.
Yeah.
Maybe the second or third week of district play.
And that's a big loss for that secondary. But even with him, I mean, you know, like I said, they've got a long way to go defensively, and hopefully, you know, they always say game 1 to game 2, you make a lot of improvements. You know, hopefully you see that for Midway, because they've got a long way to go.
I saw some Midway kids at church on Sunday, a couple of which were football players. And I was like, it's a bummer for the seniors, but the reality is that Shane Anderson's program from January to next August 27th or whenever it is will be the big step that it takes. Just from the product you saw on the field the other night, it was, and he said we've been a football team for 2 months, and so they need that foundation building in the off season. All right, we're 30 minutes in now. I don't know if Wynn, our producer, is going to love that we went this long or hate that we went this long.
Well, I'll just throw in a couple of names there. I do feel like Midway offensively showed some things. You got to see them. I watched,
Junior Thornton looks really good.
Yeah, Junior Thornton's a playmaker.
Dom Hill.
I watched some huddle video on them, and I thought, you know, Reed Tedford looked good at quarterback, made some plays. I'm a big fan of Dom Hill, who I used to see play on the JV before he.
Yeah, he's Cooper's age, right?
Yeah, Cooper is in that class with Tedford and Hill and those guys. So, so I've seen a lot of these guys over the years, and they're, you know, I think they can do some things offensively. You know, and Tommy Allison is a very creative offensive guy, and so I think he's going to put them in some spots to do big things.
Yep, absolutely. Well,
What were you going to say?
They ran a bubble screen, you know, and when it's one of those complicated bubble screens where the guy catches the ball in traffic and he tries to run out of it, you know, and that can be a really sneaky play if it's run right, but it looks really bad if it doesn't.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Anyway, I kind of got caught there not knowing whether to add another point on or close her up. So.
All right. Well, let's close her up, and we'll talk some more football next week. How about that?
Yeah, sounds good. All right.
All right.